So, hey guys, it's been a little bit since I've uploaded anything, and I wanted to put up something because I said to somebody that I would soon. So I'm totally going to do that. Just real quick before I get started, I don't know. Do let me know if my voice is really something special because I'm not super inclined to continue hands. Like, I'm checking right here. I know I said I would, but the thing is, Pharnacy Fudge has gotten to like chapter 17. Now, I've listened to some of his readings, and they're tolerable. So, gosh, unless you want to hear me read it, I don't know if if I'm going to proceed because I don't feel like it's a big, like sort of service to the fandom for me to just reinvent the wheel. Really, like there were some other folks that had continued this whose readings were not so good, and I tried listening to them and they just bothered me. And so at that point I would be like, okay, yeah, you know what, I'll try to put up a reading that's sort of audible or, that's okay. But at the point where Farnsey has put up something, like if you guys really want me to read it, then I will, but other than that I won't. Cause I can't catch up to like 17 chapters. Or I mean, I would really need to want to. Anyway, what I am going to be reading today is going to be this thing that's called Sticks and Stones. Someone told me about this at Midwestria, and they said that it was funny. So I won't be reading Hands, but this is some comedy. And I've also got something else pipelined that should be up fairly soon. I'm actually going to do some work on that today. That's kind of a surprise. So, moving on. Sticks and Stones. This fanfic, by the way, is by Nonagon on fanfiction. It's just it's a one-shot. If I'm not incorrect, it's a one-shot. Checking. It's a one-shot. Sticks and Stones, a love story by Nonagon. High noon in Appaloosa. A crowd had gathered on both sides of the main street, whispering to each other in excited, hushed tones. Bits and apple slices changed hooves as several unscrupulous mares made wagers. As the small town's clock tower chimed, a hush fell over the assembled ponies. From the opposite ends of the road, two stallions broke away from the crowds and walked towards each other. Towards one another is technically what's correct. Each balanced a single warm, steaming apple pie on his back. When the pair were about 20 paces apart, the two ponies halted. The older of the two staggered slightly and weaved back and forth before coming to a complete stop. Green Grapes snorted in contempt. "This is your last chance, old-timer!" A thin Appaloosan accent hanging on some of his words. "You stand down and take back what you said, and maybe you won't be walking home with a face full of fillin'." "Never!" Old Salty yelled back, grinning cheerily. In truth, he'd completely forgotten what the argument was about, already drunk on salt and just a little cider. The events of that morning were slightly unclear to him. He was just happy to have ponies watching him and cheering him on. Silence descended as the two stallions stared each other down. A tumbleweed passed between them, rolling on a faint but whistling wind. Green Grape's front right hoof twitched. The quick draw was a time-honored tradition in the Wild West, one that the farmer had practiced relentlessly just in case such a situation as this arose. The old drunk facing him down didn't stand a chance, unless there was a distraction. Distractions, for instance, like the clip clock. Distractions, for instance, like the clip clock. Why is that so hard to say? Distractions, for instance, like the clip clop of unshod hooves rushing down the dirt toward them, growing louder with every passing second. "Gangway, you hear?" A handsome tan stallion galloped down the middle of the road, dodging around Salty and brushing past Green Grapes, almost knocking both of them over. Green Grapes turned his head to follow him, preparing a blistering roar of outrage. As he did so, however, a large apple pie smacked him wetly in the side of his head. Ordinarily, the sounds of cheering and angry shouting would be enough to attract the apple farmer's attention, but for Brayburn, interrupting an old-fashioned duel on the main street was only the second most important thing to happen to him that day. I'm really afraid at this point that I'm going to run out of, countrified accents. We will see. Sheriff Silverstar dreamed about pastries. An empty pie plate sat atop the countless piles of papers on the sheriff's desk. Leftover crumbs and juices lay about the bottom of the pan, sending light, buttery smells up toward the dozing stallion. Silverstar lay back contentedly in his chair, his hat lowered over his eyes, occasionally smacking his lips contentedly and mumbling about tarts. The door slammed open, crashing loudly into the office wall. "Sheriff!" Brayburn yelled, panic in his voice. "Huh? Ah!" Silverstar jolted awake and tried to leap to his hooves. Unfortunately, due to his position on the chair, all he managed to do was pinwheel his front legs wildly, tip himself over, and fall backwards. This in turn sent the sheriff tumbling head over hooves until, by pure chance, he landed squarely on 4 legs. Brayburn had stopped in the doorway, his mouth hung open. Silverstar hid his own shocked expression behind his conveniently large mustache and picked up his hat from where it had fallen, trying to adopt an attitude of, "That's how I always get out of chairs." "Brayburn," the stallion replied calmly, leaning against the wall with forced nonchalance. "What can I do you for?" The apple pony managed to recover, internally resolving to never question or think again of what he'd just seen. "Sheriff!" he said, in the calmest tone he could manage. Okay, that wasn't calm. "Sheriff, there's a great big rock out there in the apple orchard. I was hoping that you might want to come out and have a look at it." Silverstar took a second to think, wondering if he'd heard the young farmer correctly. You interrupted my nap in order to tell me about one little concerned rock in your entire orchard? Brayburn shook his head grimly. "It ain't just any rock. It's the same rock. The same big, ugly, dirt-dragging rock me and the boys have had to drag out of those fields twice a day, every day for the past week and a half." He eyed the sheriff suspiciously. "Didn't you get all those memos that I wrote you?" The sheriff put his hat on and walked toward Brayburn, trying not to glance at the mountain of paper atop his desk. "Tell you what, let's go have a look at this boulder of yours and see if we can't find anything." "All right, that's what I like to hear." Brayburn nodded and led the way outside. Green Grapes sat stiffly on the edge of the porch as 2 ponies left the building, liquefied apple and crumbs of pastry still clinging to his face. He stood as he saw Sheriff Silverstar. "Sir, I wish to make a complaint." "Not now, Mr. Grapes," the sheriff said calmly. "Brayburn here is taking me to look at a rock." The pair cantered away, leaving Green Grapes standing alone with a baffled expression for the second time that afternoon. The orchard loomed ahead. Sheriff Silverstar took his time admiring the view. Between dealing with the local ponies and putting off paperwork, he didn't often have time to go out and see the trees. The last harvest had been just a few weeks ago, so the orchard was mostly empty, the farmers preferring to give the trees plenty of peace and quiet to rest up before they had to bloom once again. "So tell me about this rock, Brayburn," the sheriff finally said as they approached the tree line. "What's so great and terrible about it to make it worth dragging me all the way out here?" The apple farmer frowned. "It ain't just any old boulder," he said. "It's just plain unnatural. It's bigger than a pony, bigger than 2 ponies even. And gray. Not any kind of stone you're supposed to get round these parts." "Sounds mighty peculiar," Silverstar admitted. "But I don't see what all this fuss is about. Why not just let it be?" Brayburn snorted. "Nothing doing," he said adamantly. "Rocks and trees just don't belong together. They block growth, they damage roots, and they take up space where they just don't belong. That's why we take the time to drag it off, but every day, without fail, some pony, or somebody, comes along and dumps it back in our orchard when no pony's looking." Silverstar caught the shift in Brayburn's tone. "Well, I don't think it's a pony," Brayburn snapped back. "It takes the 3 of us 20 minutes to carry that confounded thing off our property. But as soon as no pony's looking, it'll zip right back to where it was before. No pony could carry a thing that size so quickly, or without any pony seeing." They were by this point about halfway down the central path through the orchard. Silverstar was keeping his eyes peeled, but he couldn't see anything out of the ordinary around him so far. "That is odd," he mumbled thoughtfully. "So it's always in the same place when you find it." "The same hill or close to it, and that's the worst part." Brayburn's expression darkened. "That's the hill where we planted Bloomberg." This apple family custom of naming trees had always struck Silverstar as a little odd.
"The who now?"
he asked, trying to hide his bemusement. "The tree my cousin Applejack gave us, right when we first formed the treaty with the buffalo, remember?" The farmer sighed. "They both mean a lot to me. Her and the tree, I mean. She'd be plumb heartbroken if she found out anything had happened to him." "I see. Family issues. Now those the sheriff understood. He nodded sagely and squinted toward the hill at the end of the orchard. "Ain't there something over there right now?" Brayburn stopped and followed the sheriff's gaze. "Consarn it!" he swore, breaking into a gallop. Silverstar followed close behind. The pair drew to a halt at the base of the hill. Sure enough, a large gray rock sat firmly about halfway up the slope. It was as Brayburn had described, easily large enough to fit a pair of ponies inside of it had it been hollow, and its cold gray color stood out from the rust-red plains all around them. The apple farmer paced around it angrily, a scowl now affixed to his face. "It wasn't this close this morning," he growled. "When I went to get you, it was right down at the bottom of this hill, and someone's moved it since then." He looked up and glared across the orchard, but couldn't see a living soul anywhere nearby. "This ain't funny, you hear?" he called, just in case the guilty party happened to be hidden nearby. "It's a strange thing, all right." Sheriff Silverstar walked up and tapped the rock. It seemed solid all the way through. Things like this don't just come out of nowhere. Quite the mystery. He experimentally gave it a push, rocking it from side to side. It was very heavy, but not quite as heavy as it looked. "How do you move this thing, then? Just roll it down the hill?" "Absolutely not!" Brayburn shook his head adamantly. "We tried that the first time, and the poor little Jean-Luc..." "Oh, Jean-Luc. Hilarious. All right. "We tried that the first time, and poor little Jean-Luc down there got a nasty bruise." He pointed down toward the base of the hill. Sheriff Silverstar couldn't tell which of the many trees down there he was pointing at, but he nodded anyway. "We carry this load on our backs, far away as we can manage. It's really starting to wear us down. Isn't there anything you can do, Sheriff? Can't you use some of that fancy detective magic and work out what's going on here?" Silverstar stroked his chin thoughtfully. Something about this situation just didn't add up. That was for certain. There was simply no way any pony could get this boulder anywhere in a hurry. Despite Brayburn's claim, he doubted that a buffalo could be responsible either. No creature of that size would be able to move about the orchard without attracting the attention of ever-watchful farmers. Magic was a possibility, but the only unicorn in town that he knew of, Crispy Crust, spent all of his time either at the bakery or the salt block. Oh, so sad. More to the point, what was the motive? If the goal was to annoy the apple farmers, there were plenty of places further inside the orchard that would give them much more trouble and wouldn't require the culprit to carry a huge rock up a large slope to begin with each time. No, it was more likely this had to do with this one particular hill or this one particular tree. Silverstar looked up. Bloomberg towered overhead, branched out, fanning majestically. Oh, typo. Ha! Not even my fault. Branches, it says branchhead. Branches fanning out majestically around him. Silverstar never had much of a hoof for farming, but even he had to admit that it was one impressive-looking tree. After the initial shock of being transplanted, Bloomberg had flourished, growing higher and grander than any of his neighbors. Given half the chance, Brayburn would have to rave about Bloomberg's size and stature and how each year alone he could produce twice as many apples as any two lesser trees combined. The sheriff had never personally been able to rouse so much mainstream over a simple plant. Wow. Enthusiasm was the noun I was supposed to read there. How did I do that? His barn door certainly didn't swing that way, but from a certain point of view, he could see how such a handsome specimen of apple tree might be seen as desirable. Silverstar turned away from the mysterious boulder with a thoughtful expression. He said slowly, "Why don't you introduce me to some of these new trees from the season?" "Why, sure, I'd love nothing more." Brayburn looked puzzled. What's on your mind, Sheriff? Got some ideas? Maybe. Might be too early to tell. Silver Star momentarily raised himself up onto his hind legs and looked around. They still appeared to be the only ones in the orchard. Now, Brayburn, when we're talking around down there, there's one thing I want you to do for me, all right? The apple farmer nodded cautiously. Don't look at this hill. Not even a glance. Not even out of the corner of your eye. Just let it be. He raised a hoof as Brayburn opened his mouth. I know it sounds strange, but just bear with me when we're on this one, all right? Well, all right. Brayburn scratched his head and smiled uncertainly, then shrugged and led the way down the far side of the hill. The spring started to return to his step as the pair approached the saplings at the edge of the orchard. Oh, I know a couple of these beauties have just been dying to meet you. What followed was the most mind-numbingly informative half-hour of Sheriff Silverstar's entire life. With a voice that could charm the saddle off of every mare from here to Canterlot, Brayburn meticulously described the names, special needs, and expected crop yield of sapling after sapling in a far field. The sheriff struggled to keep up, barely able to tell one young tree from the next, but the farmer crooned over each one like it was his very own foal. Once he had felt the sufficient amount of time had passed, the sheriff cut Brayburn off and gestured back toward the hill. Thanks to the apple farmer's seemingly inexhaustible supply of affection for each of the trees that they passed, they'd ended up no more than, say, a minute's walk from where they'd started. Why don't we go see how Bloomberg's doing? I reckon we've given them enough time. I'm going for sort of a Clint Eastwood voice. I know it's not very good. I'm sorry. Brayburn looked from the sheriff to the next sapling in line with disappointment. Don't worry, little Mac, he said softly, patting the young tree's outstretched branch. You'll get your turn soon. They turned away, and the two ponies started back toward Bloomberg's Hill. So who's they, Sheriff? Brayburn asked. And what are we giving them time for? You'll see, Brayburn. If I'm right, you'll see. The two ponies stopped as they crested the hill. Brayburn's jaw dropped. The mysterious boulder was no longer on the side of the hill where they'd left. Instead, it sat right at Bloomberg's side, its smooth surface almost brushing against the apple tree's trunk. But what? Brayburn sputtered. Just as I thought. Sheriff Silverstar nodded to himself as he circled around the rock and the tree. There was no sign that either had been touched in any way. I've heard stories of things like these. Always thought they were just tall tales, though. Never suspected I'd run into one myself one day. But how? Brayburn choked out. We were right at the bottom of the hill the whole time. There's no way any pony could have moved it. No one had to. Silverstar placed a hoof lightly on the rock's surface. It gave no reaction to his touch. Tell me, boy, have you ever heard the legends of the Wandering Stones? He waited for a response, but none appeared to be forthcoming. There's an old story that travelers like to tell about the Wandering Stones of Equestria. No tales are quite the same, but they all spring up from the same idea, of large traveling boulders that only move when no pony's looking. They show up wherever they please, with no rhyme or reason behind it, and then they vanish without a trace. What? Brayburn looked from the sheriff to the rock and then back again. Horse apples? There ain't no such thing. A few hours ago, heck, maybe even a few seconds ago, I would have said the same thing, Silverstar admitted. But stranger things have happened. And after what we've seen, who are we to say what's real and what ain't anymore? Brayburn's eyes narrowed. You mean that this thing it's really... The apple farmer took another look at the rock and then stepped back, repulsed. Sheriff, he hissed. I want this giant rock out of my orchard. I don't care how. Just get it the buck away from Bloomberg. Why? The sheriff shrugged. It isn't hurting any pony. Silverstar, are you even listening to yourself? Brayburn shouted. It ain't natural. I don't want that good-for-nothing piece of granite anywhere near Bloomberg or any of the other trees. Brayburn, listen. A rock and a tree together, that just ain't right. Not in this town, and not in this orchard, and not on this hill. Brayburn, listen. The pair stared at each other for a moment in silence. You aren't saying anything, Silver Star face-huffed. Not to me, boy. To them. The tan pony's look of outrage was replaced by one of confusion. Look, just come over here and close your eyes for a second. Brayburn glared suspiciously at the trespassing stone. Still, something in Silver Star's calm tone made him step forward. He closed his eyes, a scowl was fixed on his face. At first he couldn't hear anything. There was only the wind and his own breathing and... I, too, have been abandoned. His eyes shot open. The strange rock had moved again. It was now pressed against Bloomberg's side. But what Brayburn found even more heart-stopping was that voice. It passed like a spark from one inanimate object to another, arriving in his head without the need to pass through his ears. But what? Brayburn's lips flapped, but he couldn't seem to enunciate anything. Silver Star nodded, a faint smile on his face. He patted the tan pony comfortingly on the shoulder. Now, I'll admit I don't know too much about apple farming, but I've lived long on this earth, and I've seen all sorts of strange and wonderful things on it. So I know, when two things want to be with each other, there's just no force in all Equestria strong enough to keep them apart. Brayburn finally seemed to find his voice. But the roots, he insisted, feeling the situation slipping away from him. The roots are fine, see? Bloomberg's a big tree. One little rock ain't gonna hurt him. Silver Star backed away from the two inanimate objects. Just leave 'em be. Now I think Bloomberg's old enough to decide for himself. Don't you? Brayburn scratched his head. He wasn't entirely sure what to think anymore. Well, I suppose that means that we won't have to lug this thing off the hill anymore, he tried. And I guess, if Bloomberg's happy, maybe it's the best if we let nature take its course? I think that'd be best. Silver Star motioned back towards the town. Come on now. Let's leave these two in peace. I'm sure the others will be wanting to hear the news. Yeah, I guess. Brayburn looked back before starting down the hill. He wasn't sure what to make of this situation, but looking at the pair of them together, it did seem right. I sure hope you know what you're doing, Sheriff, he muttered before leaving the rock and the tree alone together. It would be several hours before any pony could check out that unlikely pair again. The next time Brayburn laid eyes on the tree, he made a discovery that nearly brought tears to him. Bloomberg's roots had visibly shifted, rising more than an inch out of the ground in some places, and now had wrapped around the rock, steadying it like some kind of embrace. Daybreak in Appaloosa, 3 days later. Patchy Joe, the town's resident rooster, stumbled wearily out of his hutch. And I assume rooster means something. He yawned, stretched, then made his way slowly down towards the town's main street. The sun was starting to peek up over the horizon. Joe cleared his throat, took a deep breath, and prepared to crow in the new day. He was cut off, however, by a hoof stomping on the ground inches from his face. Brayburn shot by at a speed that would make a Wonderbolt jealous, leaving the startled chicken, oh, he is a chicken, spinning and gasping for breath. Patchy Joe clucked in annoyance and decided that the ponies could rouse themselves for once, heading back to his coop while muttering about the farmers. Hey, chickens can't talk! Maybe clucking to himself. Sheriff Silverstar was startled out of his sleep once again as Brayburn kicked open the door. He occupied the exact same position as before, having fallen asleep at his desk again, though now he was wearing a set of striped pajamas and a nightcap. The farmer advanced, lips curled into a snarl. This is your fault, he barked. What's that, Brayburn? Seeing the anger in the stallion's eyes, the sheriff kicked his deductive skills into overdrive. Is this about Bloomberg and that rock? He asked. Are they all right? All right? Oh, they're better than all right. They're just dandy. They're absolutely fantastic. The apple farmer put on his most furious glare. Sheriff, they have eloped. And so the legend begins. All caps, its own line. Oh, and that's the end. Oh, God. Wow. Didn't even, I was like, wow, okay, yeah, there were a lot of comments below, so I didn't even. Oh, I don't even, and I didn't even. Okay, yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. I found it amusing. First comment, no, by Lord Piecrust. That's the first comment. Sheriff! I can't yell in Brayberg's voice that well. Brayburn's voice, Brayberg. That's a shipping, Brayberg. Brayberg is a shipping. This fanfic is that. Partly that, I think. Secretly.